Got one.
Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a very complicated video for you about PUBG Corporation suing Epic Games in order to try and shut down Fortnite. You've probably heard of this story somewhere before, given that Fortnite and PUBG are respectively the #1 and #2 most played games on the planet at the moment. You've probably seen some short tidbits on other channels, maybe some small news articles, court of public opinion posts, or some clickbait or whatever. But today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the facts of this case because I find it fascinating. We're going to be talking about copyright law, international treaties, and Korean law all at the same time. Fair warning, I've developed a little bit of a bad case of insomnia. I've been up for 2 days now, so if I potato some words, please do forgive me. But let's jump straight into the facts of the situation. There was a copyright infringement injunction filed by PUBG Corporation against Epic Games in January. PUBG Corporation is obviously the makers of PUBG, PLAYERUNKNOWN'S Battlegrounds. They are a subsidiary but independent spin-off of Bluehole Incorporated, and Epic Games is the company that makes and distributes Fortnite. One of the things, many things, that makes this case interesting is that PUBG runs on the Unreal Engine, which is Epic Games' primary source of income before Fortnite was a thing. Epic Games makes a ton of games, not just Fortnite, but they also develop a lot of engine tools, they have developer tools, they do a lot of licensing and asset licensing and selling and artwork and a lot of stuff like that, which PUBG relied very heavily on. The base build of PUBG had a ton of stuff just bought directly from the Epic Games licensing store. Putting all of that aside, this injunction was filed in January, so it's a 6-month-old issue that we are just now hearing about. Why are we just now hearing about it? Probably because neither side wanted to publicize or draw attention to the matter until the lawsuit was over, and also because in some jurisdictions these filings aren't public, there's a certain timer before they go public, or perhaps people just weren't paying attention to the lawsuits being filed in Korean courts. That just maybe wasn't something we were paying a whole lot of attention to. Wouldn't surprise me. And you're going to ask, well, what is an injunction? Because I've heard being sued, but I probably haven't heard this word injunction before. That is basically a formal request to ask the government to stop a person or organization from doing something. If, let's say, you run a car dealership and one of your competitors is doing something like selling cars in your name, which would be illegal, you would file a lawsuit against them along with an injunction asking them to stop doing business temporarily or stop doing that thing that is causing you harm. You can file this against a person that's impersonating you. You can file this against a religious organization that's harassing you. You can file this against a lot of people for corporations is primarily what you're going to be targeting for a lot of different things. But it's just like saying, hey government, these people are cheating, please stop them until we settle the lawsuit. The injunction was filed on the basis of copyright infringement. It was said that the Fortnite game borrowed or stole a lot from PUBG, and I do have this fun little blog post I pulled up from Epic Games. This is right when they were launching Battle Royale. It says, yeah, we made a PvP mode for Fortnite. We love Battle Royale games like PUBG and thought Fortnite would make a great foundation for our own version. I'm sure that they're going to love reading that blog post over and over and over again in court. But that's on the official Epic Games blog. And there are a lot of similarities between PUBG and Fortnite that we're going to get to later. But in this case, it appears that PUBG Corporation wanted to stop distribution of Fortnite in Korea to make it illegal for Fortnite to operate, sell product, or do any, maybe even be accessible, do any kind of business in the Korean peninsula. And Fortnite launched in Korea in January, so this injunction was filed basically the same day the game launched. One of the interesting things about this case is that the lawsuit was filed in Korea, and you'll say, well, duh, it's filed in Korea. PUBG Corp is a Korean company. And I'd be like, well, kind of, right? But not exactly. So bear with me for a moment. There's no such thing as international copyright court. Then there's also no such thing as international copyright law. You don't go to the UN and argue about it. There's no escalation beyond whatever country you file a copyright lawsuit in. There are, however, several treaties and conventions that are in place that many countries voluntarily sign on to. In the case of South Korea, they signed on to the Universal Copyright Convention. This one was drafted in the late 50s in the United Nations because the previous one, the Berne Convention, which was made in 1886, was the one everybody was using, and there were a lot of countries in the UN that felt that it just overly favored Western countries. So they all got together and drafted a new one, and a lot of people signed it, including the United States. So when you signed on to the Universal Copyright Convention, what that means is you did not give up any of your jurisdiction or authority to the United Nations. No sane country is going to do that. You never give up your own power. However, it was a voluntary agreement to update your own laws to roughly be in compliance with the guidelines that the convention set out. It's kind of like the convention, they all argued for however many years, and they came up with a list of, we'll say, 10 copyright rules, and all the countries that signed on to it agreed to include those 10 copyright rules in their legal system, so that copyright is more or less the same wherever you travel in the world. And again, there's no international jurisdiction, so this court case is only in Korea, and it has to be settled via Korean courts, and it will only affect customers in Korea. What makes this unusual is that both companies are multinational, albeit on a smaller scale. PUBG Corporation does a lot of business in the US, though they're headquartered in Korea, and Epic Games is headquartered in the US, but they're 40% owned by Tencent, which is Chinese, and they do business globally. Of very, very important note is that they both do a lot of business in the US and a lot of business in China, the US business being the most important one. They could have chosen to file this lawsuit in the United States and go through the United States legal system to fight their copyright battles. Many companies, especially Asian companies, choose to fight their legal battles in US court. It is not at all uncommon to see two Chinese companies fighting for their patents and distribution rights in China in a United States court. The reason for this is, and I'm picking on China here because this is something that's very easy for the audience, Chinese copyright protections are, well, questionable, and they very much so greatly favor the Chinese, and there's questionable enforcement, if any. The European Union has very similar copyright rules to the US, but there's a few nuances to the law that will even cause EU companies to prefer to fight their copyright battles in the US. On top of this, winning a copyright dispute in the United States will allow you to capture what is typically the most valuable market. The US market for any good, any share, any item is going to be one of the most important ones because our GDP is so high. After that, you're looking to win Europe and or China. That's where you really want to win your copyright disputes. If you win your battle and you get your monopoly on whatever it is that you want in the European Union, you're golden. If you somehow get it in China and enforced in China, you're doing great there, or in the US. However, why would you fight over Korea? South Korea anyway, is a country of about 60 million people. GDP is super high, they're very rich, and they're very valuable. I'm not trying to poop on Korea, but compared to capturing the US or China, Korea is a small prize. You might say, well, they probably want to win this court case in Korea and use that ruling as a precedent to try and win a copyright case in the United States or in China or the European Union. But to the best of my knowledge, most courts do not respect copyright rulings from other countries because it's an entirely different legal system precedent and nobody really likes being told what to do. So the question is, why bother filing this lawsuit in Korea instead of the EU, US, or China? Well, reading online seems to indicate that copyright law in China is somewhat more strict than other countries. Not only did they adhere to that good old Universal Copyright Convention, but they one-upped it a little bit extra. The strictness is primarily against pirating, but they're strict about copyright in general. It may be that this lawsuit is just a sure win for PUBG Corporation in Korea. Not only is it their home territory, so it's a Korean company defending against, we'll say, a foreign invader, but the strictness of the copyright laws is in their favor. So it's kind of like a home run, a sure win. It's something easy. We can knock it out of the park. And on top of that, when they do win, they get a nice news story about how Fortnite copied PUBG and lost a copyright infringement lawsuit with a little asterisk in Korea. But most people won't read that. It'll still be a big win in the court of public opinion and tarnish Fortnite, which is still the #1 game. It took that #1 from PUBG. However, in my personal opinion, and in the opinion of most of the people in the US and most of the people seeing this unfolding, this whole situation is a big L for PUBG. PUBG is very, very greatly losing in the court of public opinion. Fortnite's #1 game. It took over PUBG. Well, let's just say that PUBG still struggles a lot with the optimization, whereas Fortnite runs just fine on mobile. It looks basically like they're jealous. They're mad that the newcomer came in and knocked them out of the #1 spot, and they're butthurt about it. So since they can't fix their game or optimize, or they can't win that player base back, what are they going to do? They're going to file a lawsuit about it. That is the general court of public opinion that I see amongst the people that I talk to. I do believe, though, that while that is definitely a big L right now, if PUBG were to legitimately win their copyright case, the broader spectrum of people would change their minds. I do want to offer another opinion, though. I do think that there is a reasonable case that Fortnite or Epic Games could actually lose this lawsuit. Most people would say no, that the games are similar, but nobody really owns an idea and it's inspired. But I want you to think back. For those of you that weren't on the Fortnite train initially, I played this game in, I think it was like December, November, like eons ago, and it was a lot like PUBG when it launched. Launch day Fortnite was nothing like the crazy hop rock, jetpack, shopping cart, lasers everywhere, Thanos mode Fortnite we have now. It was extremely heavily inspired by PUBG. A lot of the weapons overlap, from the scars to the AWM sniper rifles, to the medkits, to the bandages, to the consumable boosts, to the storm, to a lot of the general things about the game being third person, over the shoulder, controls even. There's a lot of overlap, and I do think that over time Fortnite has definitely become its own game. It's changed a lot, and I've got to where I generally prefer it over PUBG for a lot of reasons, notwithstanding the fact that PUBG stresses my computer out into oblivion. But at launch, they were extremely similar. I even, in my first video comparing the two, talked about how incredibly similar they were. And I remember when Fortnite first launched, there were a lot of streamers streaming, and their titles were like, definitely not PUBG, a PUBG Hello Kitty Island adventure, whatever, when they were doing Fortnite. So if we want to compare the January builds of the game, or like the November, December builds of the game, I would say there is a fair case for copyright infringement. However, what this is going to turn into is an interesting case on where we draw the line on inspiration. Was Fortnite inspired by PUBG, or did it copy PUBG? Is PUBG even the original, or did PUBG copy H1Z1 King of the Kill? Well, was that even fair to make when we had Arma Hunger Games mods? And wasn't the Arma Hunger Games mods just a mod of the Minecraft Hunger Games series, which was incredibly popular, which was based on the Hunger Games book, which was incredibly popular, which was based, debatably, on the Battle Royale manga, which borrows the name of PLAYERUNKNOWN'S Battlegrounds, and then Battle Royale, Victory Royale in Fortnite. You can see where this is starting to get really complicated. So the case in Korea is, at least within the jurisdictions of Korea, going to decide if Koreans are going to be allowed to play Fortnite. It's going to be a big battle between the two games in the court of public opinion, and it's going to set an interesting precedence in game development for inspiration versus copying. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new from it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.